This recording is one of a series that provides further guidance on the assessments for the 4 core units of the Foundation Certificate in People Practice. This recording focuses on 3CO01, Business, Culture and Change in Context. Assessments are revised on a regular basis, and this guidance is based on the June 2023 version. The last moderation window for this assessment is September 2024. This assessment starts by providing a context for the assessment task. First, it's important to note the format for the task. In this unit, the task is to produce an information sheet. The 9 assessment criteria from the unit form the basis for the task, and learners have 2,500 words with which to write their information sheet. Although the word count does not have to be split evenly, it is useful to allocate around 280 words per assessment criteria to ensure each assessment criteria is covered in sufficient depth. The learner's response to the assessment should be submitted in a Word document. This assessment requires learners to produce an information sheet. The whole information sheet is included in the word count, as headings form part of the information sheet. Learners are free to choose their own headings, but each heading should align with the question and associated assessment criteria. There's no need to write the question out in full. An abridged version that fully explains or summarises what follows is sufficient. We will now move to the questions in the assessment brief. The first question asks learners to examine 3 key external influences impacting or are likely to impact on the organisation's activities. So this should be the learner's own organisation or one that they have sufficient knowledge of to be able to complete the assignment task. In deciding which 3 factors to focus on, learners might decide to use a tool such as a PESTLE analysis. This will help to generate ideas, but there's no need to include a full PESTLE analysis in the answer. Instead, the 3 key factors should be explained. So the learner could look at what the factor is, why it's arisen, and what impact it's having on that organisation. A key thing to check when answering this question is that external factors are selected for inclusion rather than internal factors. So if a learner decided to use a SWOT analysis to generate ideas for this question, then they would need to focus on the external opportunities and threats in the SWOT analysis rather than the internal strengths and weaknesses. Question 2 asks for a discussion of 2 of the organisation's business goals and why it's important for organisations to plan for how they will achieve these. The first thing to note is that there's 2 parts to this question. So the question should be broken down and learners should check that both parts are addressed in their answer. The first part is to discuss 2 business goals. It might require some research to understand what the business goals of the organisation are. And there's no need to write about all business goals so long as 2 are included in the answer. Once the business goals have been established, then there's a need to discuss why it's important for organisations to plan how they will achieve the goals. And there could be a number of factors that are included in that discussion. Question 3 asks for a discussion of the organisation's products and/or services and main customers. Again, there's two parts to this question. The first is looking at what the organisation is selling, either as a product or a service, or what it's offering as a product or service. And the second part is looking at the customers of the organisation. It's important in this question to take care not to copy and paste from the organisation's website. The learner should write those discussions and in their own words rather than take it word for word from another source. Some organisations have a huge range of products and services. So the learner might need to make a decision about how many to include and may want to focus on the key products and or services. Some organisations only have products, some only have services, and some have products and services. So it's really a case of telling it as it is. If your organisation doesn't offer services, then there's no need to write about those. The second part of the question then moves on to discuss the main customers. And this could vary depending on what the organisation does. There may be end consumers who are customers, or it could be another business who's a customer, or a range of businesses who are the main customers. Again, it's about telling it as it is and looking at the reality of who the customers are for that particular organisation. And the focus when writing about customers is on external customers of the products and or services, rather than internal customers that the people function might have. Question 4 asks for a short review of information and communication technologies that are available to people professionals, and to explain how they can be or are used to improve working practices and collaboration. So this is another question where there is more than one part. And the first part is about reviewing technologies that people professionals use. So it's important to write about the technologies that people professionals use, rather than write about any kind of technology that's used elsewhere in the organisation. Once that part of the question has been done, then there should be a link to how those technologies are used or could be used to improve working practices and collaboration. So in more recent years, many organisations have started to use platforms such as Teams for collaboration, whereas they may have previously got together physically, they now may use technology for collaboration activities, or they might use a SharePoint of some kind. So there's a whole range of ways in which learners might approach that particular answer. Question 5 asks for a definition of organisational culture and to explain why it's important to foster an appropriate and effective workplace culture. So again, the question should be broken down, and it's important to check that both parts of the question are addressed. The first part of the question is fairly straightforward, and it's a knowledge-based part, asking for a definition of what culture is. This could be supported with a reference to a source that helps to define what culture is. It's possible to draw on more than one writer who's associated with culture in this particular answer. But then it's important to move on to explain why it's important to foster positive approaches to culture. If only one part of an answer is provided, then overall the response that's written, no matter how good it might be, won't achieve a low pass or a higher mark. It would have to refer until the additional information had been added. Question 6 asks for an explanation of how organisations are whole systems in which different areas and aspects, such as culture, systems, and structure, are all interrelated, and how people professionals' work and actions could impact elsewhere in the organisation. So this question initially looks quite complicated. There's quite a lot of words in it for a start, and there's two parts. So initially, learners should break down the question and check that both parts are addressed. So we'll look at the first part initially. The first part is an explanation of how organisations are whole systems. And to develop knowledge and understanding of this subject, in addition to whatever materials are provided through the study centre, learners could explore organisation design theory in more detail. The CIPD fact sheet on organisation design is a great place to start and includes examples of some of the models that are listed on this slide and has more information about those, and also has links through to other sites that provide more information and little tools that could be used as well to help look at the extent to which an organisation is a whole system. So this notion is that organisations are whole systems. There's many aspects of the organisation. There's the organisation structure itself, and organisations might have different kinds of structures. There might be quite a tall hierarchical structure. There might be a flatter structure. There might be a matrix structure. But that structure doesn't stand alone. It's maybe being developed to achieve a strategy, or maybe the strategy has been developed in line with what the structure can deliver. But there's other aspects of organisations as whole systems. The culture is important. So the culture might be reinforced by the structure, and the culture could help the organisation achieve its strategy. Some of the other key elements of whole systems link to the kinds of skills that people who work in the organisation have, or the staff who are employed within the organisation. And these models, the McKinsey 5S, Galbraith STAR model and Burke-Litwin model, all have a slightly different take on what the elements are within a whole system in an organisation. And the idea with whole systems is that the parts are all interrelated, and that a change in one area has implications for another area. And if an organisation is thinking about change, then they need to think about the whole system rather than just changing one part, like changing the structure. So the first part of the answer in this question is to show some knowledge that organisations are whole systems. One of the well-known models could be used to illustrate this with an outline of that model. And then once that point's been established, the next point is to look at how people professionals' work and actions could impact elsewhere in the organisation. So depending on which model has been used as a vehicle in answering the first part of the question, in answering the second part, a decision can be made about how the work of the people professionals, so somebody working within an HR function, could impact elsewhere. And if we think about McKinsey's 7S model, one of the S's of the 7S is staff, and another of the S's in the 7S is skills. And they are two clear areas where people professionals' work could have an impact. So in the answer, that could be explained, and the kind of impact could be explained, to then think, well, how could that impact elsewhere? How could that impact in other elements of the system, like strategy, for instance? So although it potentially looks like this could be quite a complicated question, the starting point is to think about organisations as whole systems. Use one of the models. There are some examples on the slide, but there are others as well. So you don't need to be constrained to those. If you feel that another model would serve you better in answering the question. And then from there, start to think about how people professionals work and actions could impact elsewhere. And again, using that model as a vehicle to explain that. Question 7 asks for an explanation of why it's important that organisational change is planned and effectively managed. And questions 7, 8 and 9 all relate to change, but it's important that separate answers are provided for each of those under their own heading, and that each one is clearly identified by the assessment criteria. So in this one, the starting point is to think about why it's important that change is planned and managed effectively. So in doing this, you could think about the importance of having sufficient resources, the importance of managing change in a timely way. So there's a few areas that could be considered there. You could think about organisational and individual impacts, and you could also think back to the achievement of organisational goals, because the change is there for some kind of a reason, and it could be to help to achieve strategy, or it could be to support a different strategy. It could be about putting a new structure in place. It might be linked to new systems. So there's lots of reasons why change might take place. And in this particular answer, it's not necessary to write about a change that has happened within the organisation that was the focus for the earlier answers in looking at external factors affecting the organisation or the customers of the organisation. It's quite acceptable to write in more general terms within this particular answer. Question 8 asks for an explanation of the importance and role that can be played by people professionals within change. And there's some suggestions in there of roles that could be considered. So it's important to show knowledge of the roles that people practitioners could play. You may write about all of the examples that are in the question. You might write about a smaller number in greater detail, or there may be some other typography of different roles that that you're familiar with or you've been introduced to that you may prefer to write about. The key thing is to keep a focus on people professionals. So it's not about roles that anybody could play, it's about roles that people professionals could play within change. We now move to question number 9. And this is to discuss how organisational change can impact people in different ways, such as changing their role or status or financial situation. This is a fairly straightforward question, but is asking to think about a whole range of ways in which people might be impacted by change. So they may find that their role within the organisation has changed. The kinds of activities that they do might have changed. Some things they did before the change might not be part of their role anymore. They might have new activities that they do as part of their change. Their status may have changed. It may have risen within an organisational structure or hierarchy, or somebody's status might have changed, so they don't have perhaps the same responsibilities that they had. It could also lead to changes in someone's financial situation. It could be that they're on improved terms or conditions, or it might be that their terms and conditions have been changed in a way that is maybe less favourable, and so there's a financial impact there. That would be a bit risky from an employment law point of view, but possible. but changes may remove career pathways. So that might affect what somebody perceives their future progress to be, and it might affect how they anticipate that their career might develop within the organisation. That brings us to an end to the assessment questions. Overall, it's important to ensure that the word count is not exceeded, the overall word count. If the overall word count is exceeded, it will mean that the submission is referred, no matter what the quality of the overall submission is. It's good to manage word count as you progress through questions, but a good proofread and edit at the end will help to ensure that if word count is exceeded, it can be brought within the tolerances before submission. That's the end of this webinar. Thank you for listening, and please note that there are recorded webinars available for other units as well.